Hello and welcome to tonight's live lecture delivered as part of the Leadership Institute's Voting is Not Enough series. I'm Abigail Alger, the Director of Digital Communications for the Institute, filling in tonight for Patty Simpson, and with me is Brian Burness, who's the Vice President here at the Institute of the Campus Leadership Program. Tonight, Brian's going to be talking about voter goals.
Okay, Abby, let's get started. So when we're talking about voter targeting, what we're really talking about is how voters and the campaigns decide where they're going to target their resources. So targeting allows campaigns to allocate the resources to the precincts that will have the most impact. It also, if done correctly, will tell a candidate if he or she should even run for office, because by doing the numbers, you can decide if it's even winnable. Voter targeting, though, it's important to note, should not supplement political knowledge, but instead it should be added in addition to it. So campaigns are not about talking to all the people in your district. They're about talking to the right people. So we're getting started here. Let's look at who actually votes. So if we start with 100% of the population, generally speaking, 66% of the people in a district or community are eligible to vote. Of that, 40% are registered to vote, 25% actually vote in elections, 10% might be Democrat, 9% Republican, and then we get down to the last 1 or 2%, which are actually the single issue voters that we're looking to target. So why is targeting important to any campaign? Again, as we talked about, campaign resources are limited. Voters' past performances and attitudes can often predict their behavior in the future. And in targeting ensures that you are directing your resources to the voters with the greatest likelihood of joining your winning coalition for your candidate. Again, we're going to, why are we doing this? And what is the goal? Is to the effectiveness. We want to get the message to the right voters. And efficiency. We want to maximize the number of our voter contacts. So when we're talking about targeting, there's generally two different types of targeting that we're going to look at. We have demographic targeting, which is going to look at socioeconomical and coalition type targeting, and then we have the more traditional things that people think of when they're talking about vote goals and targeting, which is the actual precinct targeting, which focuses on voter history and voter registration statistics. So when we're looking at demographic targeting, we're looking at factors such as age, gender, education, people's occupations or employers, the ethnic background of a community or a district, the income levels in that community or district, the religious makeup of it. Are these voters affiliated with a union or not? Are they homeowners? Are they home renters? And then finally, what are their hobbies? Are they sportsmen? Are they fishermen? What else? A lot of these different factors can play into the psyche, or it helps us develop a lifestyle profile of these different voters. Now, once you've done these kind of profiles, you can often put these on a map of your district and find out where certain people live. Although I'll warn you that this isn't, you all shouldn't take this too literally or too straight, because it's often very hard to say that, for example, in precinct A, all of the lawyers in my community live, because that's just not the way people don't move in based on their precincts. So the other type of precinct targeting is going to involve some math. And so for those of you joining us at home today, we're going to go through several calculations that are going to, at the end of the day, help you determine where your voters are and how many of them you're going to need on election day to be successful. So let's get started. So one of the first things we're going to have to look at when we're doing voter targeting is, what is our turnout percentage going to be? Simply put, it's the percent of registered voters who voted in the last general election. Okay, so let's try to see how we find that. Turnout percent equals the number of voters who casted a vote divided by the total number of registered voters. Now, when you're doing this, oftentimes if you're going to your State Board of Election website or something else, just make sure they will also often show you the vote goal and the percentage that they've already done. Make sure to check it, that you know how many voters were actually registered at that time for that race.
So the best place to get this information for campaigns is through the State Board of Elections.
Generally, every state has a website where this is all public information. It's easy to get.
Great.
All right, so let's do a little example here. In 2008, in our sample precinct, we had 139,734 people voted out of 179,386 that were registered. What would the turnout percentage be? Those of you at home can try this now. Our answer would be 79.9%. Simply put, we took the number of registered people who voted, 139,000, and divided that by the total registered, 179,000, to get our voter or turnout percentage. All right, so let's move on to our next calculation, or our next formula that we're going to look at. We're going to talk about the expected vote. And now the expected vote is the number of people that you expect to cast a ballot on election day. The total number of people voting in any given election. So for this formula or calculation, the expected vote equals the turnout percentage, which we just found, times the current number of registered voters. So let's try another examples. if there are now 201,000 registered voters in your district, and as we know from before, the turnout percentage from our last election is 77.9%, what would the expected vote be? The answer, 156,661 is our expected vote, as you can see below. Now I'm going to give you kind of a simple thing of how you can do this in Excel if you're worried about your math calculations at home. Almost everything I'm going to do tonight can be done in Excel, and at the bottom of these screens I'll show you the Excel formula. Simply put, if you list on there all of your precincts, you're counting your precincts, and then you put the total number of registered voters right now. To make it simple for tonight's purposes, I just made 1,000 voters in each precinct, and then we figured out, we just used some sample voter turnout percentages. All you have to do, like in Excel, is column D, which is the current number of registered voters, times column E, which is the turnout percentage. Well, you'll get our vote. So we'll see in Sanders Corner, for example, if we have 1,000 voters with a 70% turnout, we're expecting 700 voters this next election. Let's keep it going. So how are we going to find, if we know how many people are going to vote, the next question we have to ask ourselves is how many people am I going to need to win this election? Simply put, in most elections, you need a majority of the vote, which is 50% plus one voter on election day to win. So to do that formula, we're going to take what we just found, the number of votes we expect to be cast on election day, and then we're going to divide that in half and add 1 to it. So going on the same example we've been working on tonight, if we have 156,000 voters that are being cast in our district, which is estimated, how many votes are we going to need to win in our 2012 election? The answer, we're going to need 78,331, or 56% plus 1. Now, one thing that you'll often hear, people talk about campaigns is they talk about election fraud or things that might go wrong in a ballot and everything else. That's why generally you would advise somebody running for office to try to shoot for slightly higher than just what they need to have a little cushion, 2-3% cushion. So what I would suggest is you try to shoot for at least 53% of the vote. Now, using all the calculations we've already taught you tonight, what would 53% of the vote be? In our situation here, it would be 83,030 voters that we need to win on election day. Okay, let's keep moving with some different stats that will help us decide where we're going to use our resources. Let's talk about party performance. Party performance is simply the percent of people who vote for your party in an election. Oftentimes this is referred to as the Republican or the Democratic vote. That equation looks something like this. Party performance equals the partisan vote divided by the number of votes cast. So in our sample county again, we have McCain versus Obama. You'll see the two vote goals, the two voter turnouts on the things. What is the GOP or McCain party performance here? Simply put, we are going to take the McCain vote total plus the Obama total to get our total number of votes cast in that election, and we are going to divide the McCain votes by the total votes cast, like we laid out. So our McCain or GOP party percentage here is 45%. For those of you at home doing that, obviously, in this example, McCain would have lost this precinct. And if you do this party performance at home and for your whole district and you're coming up with something like 45%, you might want to reconsider running for office as you do this, because it might be an indicator that unless with some outstanding circumstances, this is an unwinnable district. Okay. Now let's go a little bit further, the next step. Let's talk about the average party vote. It's a measure of the general political party strength in a given district.
So how does that differ from the statistic you just taught us how to do?
Well, the statistic we just did was the party vote of one candidate, McCain or Obama. When we're talking about the average, we are going to look in that sample precinct, for example, of the presidential candidate, the U.S. Senate candidate, and the House member to go across 3 different things, because there's things like voter drop-off. Some people will only vote for the president and not vote for the congressional. Right. It'll give us a better estimate of what an average Republican do, because maybe McCain is just a poor-performing Republican in this district. So, getting back to average party vote, let's look at what our equation would be. Our equation here needs to look something like this. We're going to find the candidate's party performance, candidate A, plus candidate B is party performance plus candidate C. I would recommend in any district using at least 3, but you can always use more. If you want to use 4 or 6 for the same district, that's fine to do, just you'll divide it by whatever number of races you have. Now, it's important to keep in mind when you're comparing these votes, you want to use like elections. So you want to use presidential elections or non-presidential years, because that'll have an impact on the turnout and the people that come out to vote.
So people who are doing the vote goals for 2012 should be looking back at numbers from 2008.
You can look back at 2008, or like let's say we were running for Congress in 2012. It might be helpful in your district to look at the presidential 2008 numbers, the congressional 2008 numbers, and then let's look at the 2010 as a comparison for C turnout numbers, because 2010 was a very grassroots Tea Party year, and you might have the argument that some of that excitement around from 2010 still exists today, and that could be a factor in this election. Okay. This is the way to average it out. So for those of you at home that are watching this or live on the internet, here's a sample precinct again that we've done with the GOP and the Dem vocals. So what is the average party performance if you're doing this at home? If you're watching this not live, stop and try to figure this out for yourself. Okay, let's walk through this. We're going to do for the if we have GOP president in House, we're going to walk these numbers. We found the party performance as you talked about with the presidential at 45. We found in this example the Senate one to be 38, but the House was the real winner with 60%, the one winning candidate on there. So when we average all three scores for this district, it comes out to be 47.6. That's what the average score. Again, not a traditionally great Republican district if you're running as a Republican. If you're running as a Democrat, it's looking a little bit better for you.
There's actually a question from the audience here.
Sure.
So this person is thinking about running for like a county commissioner seat.
Okay.
So what kind of targeting are they doing? Are they still looking at the presidential numbers in their precincts, or should they be looking at races farther down the ballot closer to what they're running for?
Yeah, you always want to compare races like what you're running for. So I would look at a past county commissioner race and maybe also factor in a state senate race. Just keep in mind when you're doing these races, you only want to, if you're running for county commission and you're going to compare a congressional, you only want to compare the precincts that are in your county commission district. But you also might want to factor, that's why I'm talking about going to 3, 4, 5 races, because you might also want to factor in the presidential vote to see what that's going to drive out for your turnout. Generally speaking, the top of the ticket is going to bring in more votes than the bottom of the ticket. There's a little bit of voter fallout. All right, so as I promised you earlier, we're going to keep going with Excel examples. So what you'll see on the screen here is an example of the actually Excel formula, what it would look like doing the 3 different candidates. And again, when we got the average party vote here, we're just taking candidate A, candidate B, and candidate C, and adding them up, dividing by 3. And so now we know of our precinct or our district, what precincts are top turnout, ones. So we're going to want, in this example, focus more attention on Sanders Corner and Little River than we are on Eagle River or Oak Grove, because simply put, they just don't. It's not going to work. And in the example we have on the screen here, you'll see at the bottom, the average Republican vote ends up to be 52%. So this is a winnable district. Okay, now let's talk about something a little bit more difficult. Let's talk about the ticket splitting vote. This is the measure of the tendency of a voter in a precinct to split their vote between a Republican candidate for one office and a non-Republican candidate for another office. This generally is referred to oftentimes as the independent vote or the persuadable vote. These are the voters that are going to shift from race to race, years to years. A lot of times, these are the voters we're looking for if we were running in that, comparing to like a McCain district. How do we get from a 45% to a 60%? These voters are going to make the difference. So simply put, we're going to do the same math we did before to find out the candidates' performance in each district, but we're going to take the high GOP or partisan vote for our party minus the base or the low one, and that difference is going to be the ticket splitting percentage. So in order to do this, we're going to have to look at a number of different things in our spreadsheet. The first thing we're going to have to do is find our base vote, the lowest vote of our 3 or 4 races. And an easy Excel formula to use for this is just min, capital M-I-N, and then the list of the columns. What this will automatically do in Excel is find the lowest of the 3 values and put it in that column. We will do the same thing for the high vote. So now we have a column where we know what the lowest possible vote is and the highest was for that district. So then finally, when we get to ticket splitting, all we have to do is take the high vote minus the base vote percentage, and we got our percentage. Now, I know you're looking at me right here like, these are a lot of numbers, Brian. Like, what are we doing with all these numbers here? So let's look at what these numbers actually tell us. In these 2 precincts, I'll give you an example. We obviously know that 60% for an average Republican vote means this is a good Republican precinct. We're probably going to win that. But what's the difference of a precinct that has, for example, Sanders Corner with a 16% ticket splitting and a Little River which has 9%? What that is telling us is that candidates in Sanders Corner are not as likely to vote just for the Republican because the Republican names on a ballot. They're more persuadable. They're more independent. They're more susceptible to the actual individual candidate than, say, Little River. So what this means is we're probably going to want to do more general get out the vote turnout in Little River because we know the majority of that vote is solidly Republican. They vote that way all the time. And we're going to want to do more identification and persuasion mail pieces or commercials or whatever else in Sanders Corner because we really got to talk to these people because if we don't and our opponent does, our opponent might get those votes.
So what these numbers tell you is basically dictating some of your campaign strategy and who you reach out to and who you prioritize.
Exactly, because as we talked about when we started, we only have limited resources in any given campaign, and so we want to make sure that we target those resources to the precincts where they're going to make the most difference. So in this model, persuasion-wise, when we're doing commercials or mail-ins or something else, we're going to want to go to Sanders Corner because those are voters we need to talk to. The other thing you're going to do when you get these numbers is you're going to try to figure out what precincts in your district are solidly Republican, the persuadable or swing precincts are going to go back and forth, and then your Democratic ones. And how we're going to do that is look at these three numbers that we've just talked about. So a good GOP precinct that we know is probably going to turn out for us, and we just want to turn out the vote there and don't have to do as much persuasion work, is going to be one that has a large base vote, a very high base vote. They're going to have a very high vote and a low ticket splitting vote. Basically telling us that the Republicans in this thing vote Republican, although they're going to come home for us on Election Day.
Right.
The persuadables precincts are the ones where we're going to want to spend a lot of our time during the campaign talking to voters. And this is going to be a precinct where we're going to see a large ticket splitting percentage, a large high vote, but a low base vote. This tells us that we have the opportunity to get a lot of Republican votes in this precinct, but we're not necessarily guaranteed those votes if we don't work for it. And finally, we're going to look at Democratic precincts. These are ones that are going to have a low Republican base vote, a low high vote, and a low ticket splitting vote. Basically, these are districts that we are probably not going to want to spend a lot of our resources in because no matter what we do, they're going to turn out for our opponent if we're a Republican candidate. So next we're going to move into that we know these numbers. I've given you percentages, but percentages don't tell you a whole lot. Let's talk about raw vote goals. These are the actual voters that we're going to need cast for us in precincts. So to calculate the raw vote goal, all we have to do here is take our estimated turnout, which is column F in the example that we have on the screen here, times column J, which is our average Republican vote. That's what we can expect. And in the example that we talked about before, this was 52%, what we need to win. And that's what we're going to get. So we know in Sanders Corner, of all the voters there, the 700 voters we think are going to show up, we need 422 of them to turn out for Election Day and vote for us.
Quick pause here. A couple of viewers have said that seeing the PowerPoint is a little difficult, and they'd
Sure.
also like to know if they can get the formulas. So the good news is twofold. One, this is going to be archived and available at leadershipinstitute.org/2012 as part of the Voting Is Not Enough project, so you can come back, pause, look it through later. It should be up later this week. And then the formulas are also going to be available. All you have to do is email live@leadershipinstitute.org, live@leadershipinstitute.org, and we'll make sure you get a copy of them as well.
And we have the formulas as we're going through it tonight on the bottom of every slide. We're putting the Excel formulas in there. So literally all you'd have to do in the Excel formula box is do equals F2 times J2 in our example here, and you would get the math done for us.
Great.
It's one of those deals, we got so many numbers on the board here, it's hard to make them big enough for everybody to see, but you have to be able to get the whole picture. So the raw vote goal is what is the vote that we need, to win in those precincts. If we got all those numbers down the line here in those raw vote goal precincts, we would win on Election Day based on the math.
And are these all based on the 53%?
In this example, it was 52, but yes,
Okay.
whatever you set it as, yes, this is your percent you need to win vote is basically what we're figuring out here. We're taking the average Republican vote, which if it's not higher than 50%, you're doing something wrong. These are times the number of voters. Okay, the next number we're going to look at here is the raw base vote number. This is going to be smaller in every case than your raw vote because this is the lowest possible Republican vote that we found in this precinct. This is what we're almost guaranteed to as the Republican base. No matter what we do, unless we do something and anger the voters, they're going to turn out for us. So that's what we can, just for putting an R next to our name on the ballot, we should be able to expect something like that in this precinct. So we know in this precinct, we get 371 votes that we already got locked up. We've got to find the additional ones to get to 422. Now the last number we're talking about here is the ticket splitting raw number. These are the persuadable voters that are up for grabs in any precinct. They're more the independents. They're not Democrat, they're not Republican. And based on our numbers, we know that there's 112 in this example in Sanders Corner that we can go for. Now, that is more voters than we need to get to our base goal. So we have a little bit of room here to run up the score if we got all of them. Now, let's go through a couple other examples on ways that we can find vote goals if you didn't want to go to the heavy, intensive Excel formula. There's a couple other ways, there's at least one other way we can do this. We can talk about voter percentage contribution. And what this is it's the party votes in a precinct divided by the total partisan vote in that precinct. So in other words, we're looking at, of the whole district, what percentage did each precinct contribute to our GOP total? So to find this, our formula would be voter contribution per precinct equals the party vote in an individual precinct divided by the total number of partisan votes in that election for the district. So here's our sample. Here's another sample example here. We have precincts A through F, and we have the GOP and the Democratic vote. So let's now see if you can figure out what would be the voter contribution percentage in precinct A. Based on our formula, we would have 5.6%. Now we're going to use this in a real life scenario as well. We're going to go look at our precincts here on the board. The same numbers apply. So those of you at home can try this. And here's what we got when we did the real numbers. You can see each precinct on the side, the voter contribution goal. Now, if you're worried, did I do this right at home or not, there's a simple way. When you get done with each precinct, if you add all those percentages together, at the bottom it has to equal 100%. Otherwise, we're missing a precinct somewhere. So if it doesn't equal 100%, you've done something wrong with your numbers. Okay, let's keep going here. So now that we know what the percentage voter contribution is in each precinct that we're going to need for our party, how are we going to find our actual raw vote goal? Well, once we know that, all we have to do is multiply that by the number of votes that we need to win to get our individual vote goals. So again, our precinct individual vote goals is going to equal the number of votes we need to win times the percent of voter contribution. Okay, let's go back to the example we've been working with throughout here. In our sample district here, we're going to need 83,030 votes to win. We already know from the example we just did that in precinct A, we have 5.6% voter contribution. So what is our vote goal going to be in precinct A? We're going to need 4,650 votes, to win in precinct A based on the formula I just showed you. So again, as we wrap up here tonight, I'm going to show you one more time before we take any questions there might be, how this works in real life. And you can see with a example real life precinct, this is what it would look like on our Excel sheet. You will notice we've got our voter contributions, we've got we've got our vote goals down there, and again, just like our voter contribution percentages should add up to 100, at the end of the day, all of our vote goals add up to be the 83,030 votes we need to win in an election day. And now we know that we need to get in Eagle Ridge 20,907 voters if we want to be successful. So, if that makes sense, do we have any questions for anybody?
Yeah, just a quick note for everyone watching. You can submit your questions through the Facebook chat or also by emailing live@leadershipinstitute.org. We've got a few on deck, but there's definitely room for more, so please go ahead and submit them. To get started, here we go. There was one question, what do you do if you're in a three-way race? So either for, let's say, like a primary, or now that we're in general election season, you've got a Republican, you've got a Democrat, and you've got a third-party candidate who's kind of an unknown. How do you factor that in or adjust for that?
Well, it depends on what the three-way way is. It becomes much more difficult in a Republican, if you're having in a primary race, but then you would just take that, Republican vote that you think you're going to need to get, you do it the same way and divide it by 3 or something else. If you're talking about a Republican, a Democrat, and an independent or a Green Party candidate or something else, the numbers should still apply because the voters will be the same. You're just going to be fighting for more of those persuadable voters.
Okay, so then the persuadable voters are sort of going to become even
wild
more
card.
important, I guess.
Yeah, because they could go either way, and that third-party candidate could, affect that vote.
Got it. Another question. On the slide that was talking about precinct goals, you said that local political knowledge should also help you adjust interpretation. So there was one question of how do you adjust for precincts where either your candidate lives or your opponent lives? Does that factor in?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is where we're talking about local political knowledge. So in the slide that we were showing you where we're setting our voter contribution goals, that is based off of either a sample winning race or the average Republican vote. But let's just say as a candidate, I live in Freedom Precinct. I'm going to want to plus that number up, that percentage point up a few, and maybe take another one down because as a candidate, you should turn out more voters in your home precinct than you would in any other precinct. Your neighbors know you. You've been there for a while. People see you around things. They like to vote for the local guy, things like that. By the same token, you should also plus up the vote in your opponent's precinct. So when you do all your things we talked about earlier in your labeling precincts, GOP, persuasion, or a Democrat, if you have as a persuadable precinct, or if you have a GOP precinct and your opponent lives in it, you might want to automatically turn that into a persuadable precinct and spend more time on it because it's going to make a difference.
Right, and so once you have all these numbers set, as the campaign unfolds, is there ever a time when you revisit and readjust them, or are they kind of your guidelines for the rest of the campaign?
Well, sure. As we talked about before with local political knowledge, as things in the campaign change, we're going to want to also change those things. So if we're going through the campaign and we went through a primary and we won the primary by a lot more than we expected in one precinct, we might want to plus those numbers up a little bit for the general in that precinct because we know for one reason or another people really liked us in that precinct. Or, in general elections, if there's if there's different local issues going on, maybe one community, wants to build a bridge or something of that nature, and your candidate's been a staunch opponent for, creating more bridges, and it affects that one community, and you've targeted a lot of your mail towards that, you can hopefully expect more votes to come out of that community.
Right. Okay, a couple more questions here. Let me read through them all and find one. So what is micro-targeting? How does that factor in?
Micro-targeting is a different thing where you use a lot of different things such as consumer data and things. It's more on the demographic end. So a lot of times you could factor in something to say that a man that's over 40 years old and likes to golf and drives a Mercedes and something else is likely to vote for this type of candidate. That's, it's generally something that's used on more expensive races or higher level like presidential something else, and that's not what we're talking about here, and that's not what the average person is going to be used. I'm trying to give you basic formulas here that anybody, at home could use if they're helping a friend or running themselves for anything from city council to you can even, you will use this from congressional on up, just on a larger scale.
Right. So another question was, you gave people the opportunity or the ability now really to identify swing or persuadable voters. So you know a number that live in a certain precinct. How do you actually then say, okay, of the 7,000 people that I have in precinct A, I know it's kind of a high number, which ones are the persuadables? How do you figure it out?
I mean, that's going to depend district to district, state to state. It depends on a lot of factors. Do you have, party registration in that state or not? But that's also going to be part of your job as a campaign to ID voters, and something we'll probably talk about later during this series. But this is just telling you that there are this many persuadable voters in this precinct. There's no way by judging on raw numbers for us to say which one of those 700, is Democrat, Republican, or most persuadable. This is just helping us decide in what precincts we should spend our time based on the numbers.
So once you have your vote goal figured out, that really helps power your voter ID opportunities, or are they kind of going on simultaneously? What's sort of the next step after doing your vote goals?
Well, after we do our vote goals and we see, some of our precincts that, are going to be good performing precincts for us, we're going to want to use some of that information to, for example, what precincts should we have the candidate walk door to door in? Obviously, we're going to want good precincts that we can possibly win, and with a high ticket splitting vote, persuadable vote, because we want to talk to those kinds of voters. Like we said, going back into our example earlier of the Sanders Corner versus the Little River precinct, it's probably more important for our candidate to spend more time in Sanders Corner than Little River, because in Little River, there's a smaller ticket split percentage, meaning those people are more likely to vote Republican just because our name is Republican on the ballot than in the other precinct. So this really tells us, if we have limited resources, where we can afford to spend the candidate's time, where we can afford to do mail and TV commercials or whatever else we're doing, and where our resources should be spent. It also tells us, as I told you in the beginning of the night, if we're doing all these numbers and we're looking at average Republican votes and candidate votes that are below 50%, this might not be a winnable district, and we should not run. Don't waste our time running here, because there's no way by the math that we can possibly win this district. So you're not going into the race blind.
Right, which is helpful. So another question, a lot of this is very campaign focused obviously, but are there lessons for activists and activist organizations to take from this, or particularly issue-based groups going into the 2012 election, that can help them sort of formulate the role they want to play on Election Day?
Well, it still works the same way. If you are at home and you want to, help your local Republican congressman, win, or a Democrat or whatever congressman win election, and you did these numbers at home, you would know, just like our example, that it might be more successful for you to go walk door to door in neighborhoods in Sanders Corner and tell how great this candidate is that you want to win, or something like that. Or if you're an outside organization, it'll help you see what districts and precincts your candidate is most vulnerable or needs the most help in.
So this may be a particularly fitting question for you, combining campaign and campus. But how is this applicable for college students on a college campus? What lessons can they take, either for turning on the vote or for their own activism?
You obviously, the one thing you could do in this scenario is look for the number of people that voted in the precinct where the college is located, because that would be a sign of the people that are living right off campus or are registered to vote on campus, and try to affect that precinct. You would have an idea of how many votes you would want to turn out for the candidate or something else, but I don't think it's any more or less conducive for a college student than it is anybody else. This is just general targeting information for anybody that wants to run. But basically what a campaign can do then is turn this information, when we got our vote goes, over to your precinct captains or your district chairs, whatever else, and say, Abby, if I'm going to win, I need you in your home precinct to deliver X number of votes for me on election day. Start going through, calling your friends and neighbors. You've got 10,000 people you've got to identify and find out who those people are. That's what this does.
Great. So I think those are all the questions that we have tonight. Any last words, messages, anything you want to share to wrap it up?
No, I mean, I think that the most pivotal thing is this information can be used for any race, and it is kind of complicated at first, but if you stick with it and figure it out, it will really give you it's a basic thing that any campaign to use to give you an idea of where you stand and where you need to target your resources.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight for this live lecture, again, part of the Leadership Institute's Voting is Not Enough series, a 90-day project that's running from August all the way up to Election Day. Please join us again next week. We're going to be hosting a webinar on voter registration. Same time and also same place, leadershipinstitute.org/live. And again, the recording of this presentation will be up later this week at leadershipinstitute.org/2012. Thanks so much and have a great night.
Thank you.